Imagine a secret so carefully buried, so meticulously hidden, that it survives not just decades, but generations. A truth that, if revealed, could shatter the lives of everyone who thought they understood the world they lived in. In the heart of antebellum America, there was a plantation, a sprawling, sun-drenched estate where power was absolute, and human lives were treated as commodities. But beneath the polished floors, manicured gardens, and the facade of genteel authority, a shadowed story was unfolding, one that would remain hidden for 40 years. This is not a tale of simple rebellion or escape. This is a story about a mother who made a choice so audacious, so dangerous, that it would alter the lives of 2 families forever. A mother whose love for her child collided with the cruel logic of oppression, and who executed a plan so cunning, so precise, that for decades, no one suspected a thing. On the surface, she was just another enslaved woman, her labor exploited, her freedom stolen. But in secret, she became a master of deception, an architect of fate. Picture the quiet tension in the grand house at night. The master asleep, trusting, unaware. The air thick with the smell of candles and waxed wood. Somewhere, in the dim corners, decisions are being made that no law, no preacher, no overseer could ever sanction. Decisions that defy morality, that question what it means to wield power, and to resist it. Every stolen moment, every whispered plan, is a small act of defiance, but one that carries enormous risk. Discovery would mean death, not just for her, but for her child, for anyone who even whispered of the swap. And yet, she did it. She swapped her newborn child with the master's. A simple act that would ripple through decades, hidden in plain sight, manipulating perceptions, identities, and loyalties. The world continued, unknowing, while the lives of those involved were quietly redirected. Imagine the psychological weight of living a life that isn't your own, of growing up in a house where everyone assumes you are someone else entirely, while your real mother labors invisibly, always near, yet unseen. This is where the rabbit hole begins, and it is darker than you think. By the end of this journey, you will not look at history, or human nature, the same way again, because the story of that mother, that child, and the consequences of a single act of rebellion is a reflection of the structures, the power systems, and the hidden truths that shape every life around us. The plantation's rhythm was deceptive, its beauty masking the machinery of control. Every meal, every chore, every smile and reprimand was calculated, designed to reinforce a hierarchy that made obedience feel natural. Yet beneath that surface, a hidden war was waged every day, fought in silence by those the system sought to suppress. The mother who swapped her child understood this better than anyone. She recognized that power was never just physical, it was psychological. Fear could control men. Love could inspire loyalty. Secrets could wield influence more profound than any whip. And in that understanding, she found her weapon. She turned the master's assumptions against him, using the very mechanisms of trust and complacency that defined the plantation to her advantage. Each glance, each passing moment, each carefully timed gesture was a piece of a strategy that only she could see in its totality. It was a quiet, terrifying brilliance, the brilliance of someone who knows the world is not fair and refuses to surrender to it. But this was not a game. This was life and death, a test of nerve and cunning that would shape destinies. Imagine the tension in the air as she placed her child in the cradle meant for the master's heir, pretending to rock the baby to sleep while the other women in the household remained oblivious. Every sound in the night, the crack of a branch, the shift of a floorboard, the whisper of wind against a shutter, threatened to expose her secret. And yet she persisted, calm, calculated, resolved. The stakes were unimaginable. One misstep, one careless glance, and not only would her child be lost, but her own life would be forfeit. What she achieved was more than a swap. It was a subversion of the very system itself. She turned the plantation's hierarchy into a tool for her own agenda, manipulating perception so completely that no one would suspect the truth for decades. And in doing so, she illuminated a reality often hidden from view, that history, the stories we inherit, the truths we take for granted, are not always what they seem. Power, control, and identity are fragile constructs, susceptible to the will of those daring enough to challenge them in silence. Every life on that plantation, every authority figure, every slave, unknowingly became part of a living experiment in deception, loyalty, and the psychology of domination. And yet, The consequences of her choice would not remain secret forever. 40 years later, long after the plantation had fallen into history's shadow, the truth would emerge, and when it did, it would force a reckoning not just for the families involved, but for everyone who believed they understood justice, morality, and the human heart. The mother's act of defiance was a spark in a darkness so profound it would take decades for the world to fully perceive it. For 40 years, the Swap children grew under the weight of a secret they could not understand. One child, raised in privilege, unaware of the blood that ran through their veins, absorbed the manners, expectations, and identity of a world that was not theirs. Every smile of the master's wife, every expectation placed upon them, unknowingly reinforced a lie. Meanwhile, the other child, hidden among the enslaved, learned the harsh realities of oppression, the subtle lessons of survival, and the power of invisibility. They learned early that being unseen was sometimes more valuable than being noticed, that silence could protect, and that cunning could be as potent as brute strength. The mother's decision created parallel universes, one of comfort and authority, another of struggle and defiance, each a mirror reflecting the fragility of identity itself. Identity is not just inherited, it is taught, enforced, and assumed. And in these parallel lives, the children unknowingly became players in a centuries-old experiment in control. They were not merely surviving, they were living symbols of resistance, unconscious testaments to the audacity of a mother's will. Imagine the invisible strings she had tied, manipulating lives across decades, unseen yet unbreakable. Every decision, every action, every step along their paths was subtly guided by the consequences of her audacious choice. The mother had created a system within a system, and the plantation itself became a stage for lessons in power, perception, and human psychology. The emotional weight of these lives cannot be overstated. The child raised in privilege carried an identity that wasn't theirs, a sense of entitlement grounded in someone else's sacrifice. The child raised in oppression carried the knowledge of survival but never knew the truth of what they had been denied. Each day, each encounter reinforced narratives they were unaware of, stories scripted decades earlier by a single act of love, defiance, and risk. The emotional resonance of this secret was profound. The mother had weaponized love, transforming it into a force capable of bending destiny itself. And yet, all this careful orchestration, all the years of hidden strategy, was always on the precipice of exposure. One conversation, one slip of memory, one act of curiosity could unravel everything. The tension, the danger, the meticulous control, this was the true legacy of the Swap. It was not just about survival or defiance. It was about demonstrating the invisible power one person can wield against the structures that seek to dominate them. The mother's actions revealed the cracks in every system of control, hierarchies that seem absolute, identities that feel fixed, truths that appear immutable. In the next section, we will explore the first hints of the truth emerging, decades later, and how the world's understanding of morality and justice is challenged when the hidden story finally comes to light. Decades passed in silence, yet secrets never truly sleep. The first cracks in the mother's carefully constructed deception appeared subtly, like shadows stretching across a sunlit room. Small inconsistencies in behavior, familiar gestures, unexplainable traits, tiny echoes of blood that refused to be silenced, began to ripple through the lives of the Swap children. The child raised in privilege noticed an odd sense of displacement, an unspoken tension beneath the smiles and accolades of the household. The child raised in oppression glimpsed patterns of recognition, fleeting familiarity in faces they had never known but somehow remembered. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when buried beneath layers of loyalty, fear, and the passage of time. History, in this sense, is less about facts than about perception. Those who believe they are masters can be deceived, those who accept their fate as slaves can wield hidden power, and those who think they understand their own identity may discover that every assumption they have held is false. This is where the story becomes dangerous. Once a secret like this begins to awaken, it destabilizes everything around it. Trust fractures. Memory becomes a weapon. Relationships are tested not by what is seen, but by what is known in the hidden spaces of the mind. For 40 years, everyone believed the narrative they had been told, and then reality began to seep in, almost imperceptibly at first. The mother, now older, watched from the shadows as her children lived out their lives, unknowingly dancing along paths she had scripted. She knew that every interaction, Every small revelation could ignite curiosity and suspicion, and in that knowledge lay both triumph and fate. Triumph, because a plan had succeeded beyond imagination, 2 lives redirected, 2 fates altered, and the plantation's hierarchy subtly undone. Fate, because the longer the truth remained hidden, the more explosive its eventual revelation would be. Secrets of this magnitude do not merely shock, they rewire perception, forcing those who hear them to question morality, loyalty, and the very nature of identity itself. And then the first whisper came, a passing comment, a forgotten name, a memory shared in jest that drew attention to inconsistencies previously ignored. The household's equilibrium trembled, almost imperceptibly at first, like the first cracks of an earthquake beneath solid ground. But those cracks were enough. They hinted at something far larger, something that would not be contained. The foundations of assumed reality were weakening. The stage was set for a confrontation with decades of hidden truths, and nothing would ever be the same. In the next section, we will explore the moment when the world of appearances begins to collapse completely, and the hidden forces behind the swap start to reveal themselves, exposing long-suppressed psychological and emotional consequences. When the cracks widened, reality began to feel like a trap. The child raised in privilege, now an adult, started noticing subtle inconsistencies in family stories, in the behavior of those around them. Faces, names, events, they no longer aligned the way memory insisted they should. Something about their own reflection, their own instincts, whispered that they were not who they had been told to be. At the same time, the other child, raised among the enslaved, began to sense the faintest echoes of recognition, gestures, mannerisms, even the cadence of a voice that seemed impossibly familiar. It was as though an invisible thread had been tugged from the past, pulling at them, demanding attention, insisting on acknowledgement. The secret that had lain dormant for decades was awakening, and the air itself felt charged with tension. This is the point where the psychological weight of the mother's act becomes apparent. To live in a lie so meticulously constructed is to carry a silent, invisible burden. Every interaction with the world is a negotiation between what is seen and what is felt, between identity and imposed perception. Both children, though worlds apart in circumstance, were experiencing the same phenomenon, a slow unraveling of reality. They were beginning to understand that the foundations of their lives, everything they had been told, everything they had assumed, might be built on deception. The mind strains to comprehend such revelations because they destabilize not just self-perception, but one's understanding of loyalty, morality, and justice. The mother, having orchestrated the swap, now watched the consequences unfold. Her defiance had not been merely a theft, a substitution. It was a manipulation of destiny. And while she had protected her child in the immediate sense, the psychological cost of decades-long secrecy was inevitable. Love had demanded deception, survival had demanded courage, and the world had remained ignorant. But the moment of reckoning had begun. One question, whispered in the right place, could ignite a chain reaction. Who are we really? And why does it matter? By now, the tension in the household, though unspoken, was palpable. Conversations carried a weight of unrecognized truths. Glances lingered too long, gestures repeated themselves with uncanny familiarity, and memory itself became suspect. The hidden architecture of the mother's plan revealed itself not through revelation alone, but through the subtle, almost imperceptible psychological dissonance it created. Each adult, each interaction, each suppressed emotion acted as a pulse, reverberating across time, hinting at the presence of something more, something buried beneath layers of assumed reality. In the next section, we will follow the first direct confrontation with the truth, the moment when the swap identities collide with the lives that had been lived, and the raw power of suppressed knowledge erupts, challenging not only personal perception but the moral fabric of everyone involved. The confrontation did not arrive with fanfare. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in a hallway, a kitchen, a whispered remark that seemed harmless at first. But for those whose lives had been built on decades of misperception, the impact was seismic. Questions began to form, hesitant at first. Why does this feel familiar? Why does this look like me? The child raised in privilege, now grown, confronted memories that didn't belong to them, a life they didn't live, and realized that the identity they had assumed as absolute was, in fact, borrowed. Simultaneously, the other child, the one raised among the enslaved, felt the invisible thread tighten, a sense of belonging in a world that had always kept them apart, that had told them they were less than. Recognition struck like a bolt of lightning, shattering the comforting illusions that had guided both of them. This moment is crucial. The hidden power of a secret is not just in its concealment, but in the slow, inevitable unmasking that forces every participant to reckon with their reality. What the mother had orchestrated was more than a swap. It was a test of perception, identity, and the unspoken structures that govern behavior and belief. The adults, now confronting truths 40 years in the making, experienced an emotional collision, a force that cannot be mediated by logic alone. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a deep, primal fear surged in waves, destabilizing relationships that had been assumed permanent. The invisible chains of deception tightened even as they broke. What makes this story profoundly human and terrifying is the psychological machinery at work. To live under false assumptions is to be subtly manipulated, to have your loyalty, morality, and selfhood conditioned by forces you do not perceive. Every glance, every word, every expectation had been weaponized by a single act of love, courage, and defiance. The mother had bent reality without being seen, and now the consequences unfolded in full. Both children, the privileged and the oppressed, had been unknowingly enrolled in a psychological experiment of extraordinary depth, a study in identity, power, and the fragility of truth. And yet, this revelation does not merely shake personal lives. It challenges the broader understanding of justice, morality, and history. Who deserves empathy? Who is accountable? When identity itself is manipulated, can we ever fully judge the actions of those who lived in shadows, or those who unknowingly participated in them? 40 years of hidden truths converge, and the emotional weight is unbearable. The revelation is not only a story of survival, it is a confrontation with the invisible forces that shape human behavior, a mirror reflecting the unseen hierarchies, fears, and manipulations that govern us all. In the next section, we will explore the moral and psychological reckoning that the revelation triggers, the ripple effects across generations, and how suppressed truths exert power long after the initial act of defiance. The truth, once revealed, does not remain confined to a single moment. It spreads like a contagion through the minds and hearts of everyone touched by it. The children, now adults, were forced to reconstruct the foundations of their identities. Every relationship, every memory, every deeply held assumption came under scrutiny. The one raised in privilege felt the dizzying dislocation of realizing their life had been borrowed, built on a deception intended to protect, yet now leaving them unmoored. Every act of kindness or authority extended toward them by the master's household now carried a hidden, insidious weight. They had been loved, guided, and shaped under false pretenses. The other, raised among the oppressed, wrestled with a flood of emotions, anger at a life stolen, or at the cunning of a mother's plan, sorrow for decades lost, and a strange, unanticipated pride. The psychological complexity of this revelation was staggering, a cruel and beautiful symmetry in human experience. Generations feel the echoes of such acts long after the initial event. The ripple effect of the swap extended beyond the immediate family, influencing the perceptions and decisions of others who were never aware of the secret. Family legends, traditions, and inherited expectations began to fracture. The moral landscape was destabilized. Was the mother's act theft or salvation? Rebellion or treachery? Each observer had to confront the unsettling truth that morality is rarely absolute. It is shaped by circumstance, necessity, and courage. The revelation forced a confrontation with uncomfortable realities, the systems of control, the mechanisms of oppression, and the extraordinary lengths one must sometimes take to reclaim agency over life and destiny. And yet, amid the chaos, there is clarity. The mother's defiance exposes the cracks in every system of dominance, showing that control is never total, that hierarchy can be bent, and that courage, even in secrecy, can wield power far greater than brute force. The revelation becomes a teacher, instructing all who hear it about the fragility of imposed authority and the resilience of human ingenuity. Every deception, every act of hidden strategy, becomes a lesson in psychological mastery. This is not just history. It is a blueprint for understanding manipulation, resistance, and the subtle currents that shape lives. Now, I want you to participate. If you feel the pull of hidden knowledge, if you recognize the power in understanding the forces unseen, type this symbolic phrase twice in the comments. I see what was hidden. Twice. This is more than engagement. It is a conscious acknowledgement that you are stepping into awareness, that you are willing to confront uncomfortable truths, and that you are aligning yourself with the unseen forces that shape reality. In the next section, we will descend even deeper into the emotional and societal consequences of the swap, exploring the slow unraveling of assumptions, the fractures in trust, and the extraordinary cunning required to orchestrate such a deception over decades. The consequences of the swap were not confined to private grief or revelation. They rippled outward, subtly reshaping the entire social ecosystem of the plantation and beyond. Authority, once absolute, faltered when confronted with the invisible hand of deception. The master's household, which had long operated under the illusion of control, began to experience small, inexplicable disruptions, decisions questioned, loyalties shifting, routines faltering. Those who had believed themselves secure in their knowledge of family dynamics and social hierarchy started to feel the disquieting pressure of uncertainty. A single act, orchestrated in silence decades earlier, had undermined the foundations of power itself. Control, it seemed, was always more fragile than it appeared, susceptible to cunning, courage, and the subtle manipulation of perception. The children themselves became living proof of the instability of identity and privilege. One bore the advantages of status, but carried within them the dissonance of a borrowed life. Their confidence, their authority, their very sense of self became tinged with unease, because intuition, memory, and instinct could not be fully erased, even by decades of careful deception. The other child, raised in hardship, felt both empowerment and alienation. Empowered because survival and cunning had shaped their character, alienated because the life they were denied left an unfillable void. The psychological complexity of this arrangement cannot be overstated. It demonstrates how identity is simultaneously constructed and constrained by systems of power, by the stories we are told, and by the hidden knowledge that lives beneath the surface of everyday life. At the societal level, the revelation of the swap forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths. How many assumptions about loyalty, morality, and competence are based on appearances rather than substance? How often do those in power fail to perceive the subtle currents that can alter outcomes in ways they cannot predict? And most importantly, how many lives have been shaped, positively or negatively, by decisions made in secret, by invisible acts of defiance that history has chosen to obscure? This is the deeper lesson of the mother's audacity. Control is never total. Systems can be subverted from within, and the human mind is both resilient and vulnerable in ways that defy conventional understanding. By the time the truth surfaced, the consequences were irreversible. Trust fractured, assumptions were dismantled, and the emotional landscape shifted permanently. The mother's audacious act became not just a story of survival, but a lens through which we can examine the fragility of human constructs, the hidden power of defiance, and the extraordinary lengths to which a single individual can manipulate reality in the shadows. The ripple effects of one mother's courage echoed across decades, leaving a legacy that challenges every notion of morality, justice, and identity. In the next section, we will explore the first emotional confrontations between the children and the adults who had unknowingly participated in the deception, revealing the raw, unfiltered human response to 40 years of hidden truths. The first confrontations were nothing short of seismic. When the children, now adults, faced those who had unknowingly participated in the deception, the air itself seemed charged with tension. The privileged child looked into the eyes of the master, the family members, and the household staff, seeing faces they had trusted for decades now layered with uncertainty and betrayal. Questions hung unspoken but felt in every gesture. How could this have been hidden from me? How did everyone let this lie persist? Meanwhile, the child raised among the oppressed experienced a surge of emotions almost too complex to name: indignation, awe, sorrow, and an unfamiliar thrill at recognizing a hidden connection that defied everything they had been told about their place in the world. These encounters were raw and unfiltered. Decades of suppressed truths erupted in waves of disbelief and emotional intensity. The master's family, who had unknowingly claimed as their own a child not theirs by blood, confronted the fragility of their authority and the illusions upon which it had been built. Their certainty about hierarchy, loyalty, and the natural order of life shattered. The enslaved child, who had endured the brutality and invisibility imposed by the system, now confronted a life that had been redirected by the quiet audacity of one woman's love and courage. The emotional contrast between the two worlds, the one of comfort and the one of oppression, was made stark, impossible to ignore. Psychologically, the impact was profound. The revelation forced everyone involved to reconsider every memory, every lesson, every assumption they had carried for decades. Cognitive dissonance surged. The mind struggled to reconcile decades of belief with the undeniable evidence of the swap. Emotions became raw instruments of reckoning. Guilt, pride, fear, and all collided in ways that left no participant untouched. Even those who were not directly involved in the swap were drawn into the turbulence, because secrets of this magnitude exert influence far beyond their immediate scope. Identity itself became a battlefield, contested not by argument, but by the undeniable truth that reality had been shaped in ways no one could have foreseen. The confrontation also illuminated the mother's brilliance. Every act, every manipulation, every silent observation over decades revealed a deep mastery of psychological control, strategy, and human nature. She had not only protected her child, but had orchestrated a scenario that tested the limits of perception, authority, and morality. Her audacity forced a reckoning that reshaped the moral and emotional landscape, leaving the participants to grapple with the uncomfortable knowledge that power, identity, and loyalty are not fixed. They are fluid, malleable, and often subject to the will of those willing to act in the shadows. In the next section, we will examine how the revelation altered relationships permanently, reshaped personal identities, and forced a confrontation with the moral and ethical questions that had been suppressed for 40 years. The aftermath of the revelation was a landscape of fractured relationships and shattered assumptions. Bonds once thought unbreakable were tested, loyalty was questioned, and the very notion of trust became fragile. The child raised in privilege wrestled with a life built on borrowed identity, struggling to reconcile the love they had received with the knowledge that it had been misdirected. Every memory of family gatherings, every moment of affection, suddenly carried a shadow of doubt. Meanwhile, the child raised in oppression faced a mirror of loss, a life denied, opportunities stolen, yet tempered by the knowledge of a mother's calculated courage. Their existence had been shaped by both deprivation and defiance, leaving them with a sense of power and pain intertwined. Relationships between those who had unknowingly participated in the swap became taut with unspoken awareness. Family members who had believed themselves morally upright now confronted the fragility of their judgment, the ease with which appearances could deceive, and the subtle ways power had been wielded against them without their knowledge. Servants, overseers, and extended family members all grappled with the revelation, feeling the quiet, destabilizing influence of hidden manipulation. What had seemed absolute, the hierarchy, the social order, the assumptions of identity, was now a complex, uncertain terrain where every action and every perception required reevaluation. Psychologically, this period was a crucible. Both children and adults experienced a profound shift in perception, an awakening to the fact that reality can be manipulated and identity can be imposed or stolen without visible resistance. The mother's act of defiance had demonstrated that love, courage, and cunning could bend circumstances over decades, but it also left those affected with the enduring question: who controls the narrative of our lives? Every memory, every relationship, every long-held belief had to be weighed against the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. This reckoning was not merely personal. It was systemic, revealing the hidden dynamics that govern power, loyalty, and obedience in every society. The emotional intensity was magnified by time. Decades of suppressed truths had hardened patterns, creating habits, assumptions, and behaviors that could not easily be undone. Yet the revelation forced a confrontation with these invisible forces. Grief, pride, guilt, and all blended in ways that left no participant untouched. Some relationships could adapt, rebuilt on a new understanding of reality. Others fractured irreparably, casualties of the psychological and moral upheaval. In every case, the mother's audacious act of rebellion had left a permanent mark on the human psyche, demonstrating that a single choice, executed with precision and courage, can ripple across lifetimes. In the next section, we will explore how the hidden truths influenced not only personal identities but also the broader understanding of morality, history, and the mechanisms of power that allowed deception to persist for decades. The revelation of the swap extended beyond individual lives. It became a lens through which the very nature of morality, history, and power could be examined. For 40 years, the world had operated under assumptions that were, in fact, false. This deception exposed a fundamental truth. Systems of control, whether social, familial, or institutional, depend on perception as much as reality. Authority is fragile because it relies on trust, obedience, and the belief that the structures around us are immutable. The mother's act of subversion revealed how easily these perceptions can be manipulated, and how one person, acting in silence, can redirect the currents of power without ever being seen. History itself becomes suspect under this lens. If a single life, a single act of courage, can rewrite decades of assumed truth, then how many other narratives we accept are similarly constructed, manipulated, or hidden? The story of this mother and her children is a microcosm of suppressed truths that permeate human experience, hidden agendas, invisible forces shaping outcomes, and the quiet power of knowledge kept from those who think themselves safe or secure. Morality, in this context, is not absolute. It is a living construct, constantly challenged by circumstance, necessity, and the courage to act when the world demands compliance. The mother's decision was a moral rebellion, a deliberate redefinition of what it means to protect, to love, and to resist. The psychological implications are equally profound. Identity, loyalty, and trust were not simply challenged. They were fundamentally destabilized. The children, the family, the household, and even the extended network of the plantation had to reconsider their roles and assumptions. The privileged child grappled with the hollowness of assumed authority, the hollow foundation of a life built on borrowed identity. The oppressed child confronted a paradoxical empowerment born from hardship, cunning, and the unacknowledged guidance of a mother whose influence had never been visible. This duality highlights an essential truth about human psychology. Perception shapes reality as much as reality shapes perception. And yet, the revelation was not merely destructive, it was transformative. Those who confronted it were forced to acknowledge the fragility of the systems they had trusted, the assumptions they had held, and the hidden forces that shape life in ways they cannot always see. Knowledge, once uncovered, became a weapon, a lens, and a mirror. It demanded a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about privilege, about oppression, about the hidden threads of control that run through every society, and about the extraordinary potential of a single individual to bend reality through courage, strategy, and patience. In the next section, we will explore how this story resonates with modern systems of manipulation and control, showing that the same forces that operated on the plantation persist in society today, hidden in plain sight. The lesson of the mother's audacious act is not confined to the past, it reverberates in the present. Systems of control, manipulation, and invisible power persist in every society, though often hidden beneath layers of normalcy, etiquette, or bureaucracy. Just as the plantation relied on perception to enforce obedience, modern institutions exploit assumptions, ignorance, and trust to maintain authority. Governments, corporations, educational systems, and even social networks operate with invisible currents, shaping behavior, dictating belief, and influencing identity, often without the individual ever realizing it. The same principles that allowed one woman to redirect the fate of 2 children decades ago are at work on a larger scale today, subtly steering entire populations. The psychological mechanisms are identical. People comply not because they are forced at gunpoint, but because they are conditioned to accept hierarchy, narrative, and authority as truth. Fear, respect, and illusion work together to enforce obedience. Loyalty is often cultivated through belief in shared values, even when those values conceal hidden agendas. And those who recognize the manipulation can, like the mother, act in silence, leveraging perception, timing, and subtlety to disrupt systems that seem unassailable. The story of the swapped children demonstrates a universal truth. Power can be subverted by knowledge, cunning, and the audacity to act where others comply. Identity remains the most fragile of all constructs. Whether on a plantation or in a modern institution, people are assigned roles, responsibilities, and expectations, many of which are not inherently theirs. The revelation of the swap shows that assumptions about identity can be weaponized or redirected. Those raised to believe in a certain status or position may discover it is borrowed, imposed, or false. Those denied opportunity may possess the latent skills, insight, and cunning to seize control in ways invisible to those in authority. Understanding this dynamic is essential to navigating any system of power. Perception can bind, but insight can liberate. This is why the story resonates so profoundly with those seeking mastery over their own lives. It is a case study in strategy, patience, and psychological acumen. The mother's single, courageous act created ripples that spanned decades, influencing people far beyond her immediate circle. And it illustrates the dangerous truth about systems of control. They are only as strong as the assumptions that support them. When those assumptions are challenged, when hidden knowledge is applied, the very foundations can crumble. In the next section, we will explore the philosophical implications of the mother's choice, examining the moral calculus of love, defiance, and survival, and the lessons it holds for those who seek to understand power in all its forms. The mother's decision forces us to confront a difficult moral paradox. Can an act of deception be righteous if it is born of love and survival? For 40 years, she lived with the weight of this choice, fully aware that discovery could mean death, yet compelled by an instinct to protect her child at all costs. Morality, in this context, is not black and white. It is situational, fluid, and shaped by necessity. She navigated a system designed to strip her of agency and weaponized the very structures of oppression against themselves. Her courage illuminates a deeper truth about power. The morally audacious often bend reality not by brute force, but by insight, foresight, and the willingness to operate in shadows where others fear to tread. Philosophically, her act challenges the foundations of justice and authority. The master's family believed they held absolute control, yet their perception was manipulated with astonishing precision. The enslaved community, constrained by external structures, became unwitting participants in a drama orchestrated by one woman's vision. This raises profound questions about the nature of agency. How much of our lives is determined by choice, and how much by circumstance, perception, and the unseen forces that shape outcomes? The story reveals that the apparent stability of society is always conditional, always fragile, and always subject to subversion by those who understand the hidden mechanics of power. Emotionally, the mother's audacity is a study in calculated risk. To act against an oppressive system without exposure requires a mastery of patience, timing, and psychology. Every glance, every action, every suppressed reaction becomes part of a strategy designed to protect what is most precious. Her act was not impulsive. It was deliberate, premeditated, and executed with the knowledge that success would alter not only her child's life, but the lives of all those around them. This demonstrates the intersection of morality and strategy. Ethics are not abandoned in pursuit of survival. They are redefined, recalibrated to align with both love and efficacy. The philosophical weight extends further. What defines identity, if it can be secretly swapped and subtly redirected for decades? What defines justice, if the system itself enforces inequity but the oppressed are capable of subversive brilliance? What defines courage, if operating in secrecy can achieve outcomes impossible through confrontation alone? These questions do not yield simple answers, yet they are central to understanding the enduring impact of this hidden act. In the next section, we will explore how the revelation eventually forced both children and the surrounding community to confront not only the truth, but the deeper lessons embedded in decades of invisible strategy, shaping their understanding of power, morality, and human nature. The awakening came slowly, like dawn creeping over a landscape long shrouded in darkness. For the children, now adults, it was as though they had been living inside a carefully constructed illusion, one that had shaped every instinct, every decision, every relationship for decades. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Their identities, long assumed and unquestioned, were not their own. The child raised in privilege felt the dizzying weight of stolen lineage, the paradoxical comfort of love and the sting of deception intertwined. The child raised in oppression experienced an unexpected surge of power, yet coupled with the raw grief of a life denied. Every memory, every habit, every carefully cultivated skill now had a hidden context, and with that context came a new understanding of resilience, agency, and ingenuity. This awakening extended beyond personal identity. It illuminated the structures that had held everyone captive, psychologically and socially. The household, the plantation, and even the extended community had operated under assumptions meticulously manipulated by a single individual. Authority, trust, and loyalty were revealed as malleable constructs, maintained as much by perception as by action. The mother had exploited this truth, bending the world around her without ever leaving a trace of suspicion. In doing so, she taught a lesson that echoes across time: the power of understanding human psychology, the subtle art of strategic deception, and the enduring impact of deliberate courage. The revelation forced not only self-reflection but also a confrontation with moral complexity. Who was right? Who was wrong? The mother acted to protect, yet her actions disrupted the lives of many. The privileged child had been raised under false assumptions. The oppressed child had been denied what was theirs by birth. Every participant was implicated, consciously or not, in a system that had enabled deception. And yet, the story carries no simple judgment. Instead, it illuminates the nuanced interplay between survival, love, morality, and power. True understanding arises not from condemnation, but from recognition of the forces at work, the invisible threads that bind human lives and shape destiny. Psychologically, the impact was transformative. Both children were forced to reassess every belief about themselves and others. Trust had to be rebuilt, identities reconstructed, and perspectives expanded. The awakening revealed the fragility of assumed knowledge and the strength required to act when circumstances demand audacity, patience, and courage. The mother's choice had created a living experiment in resilience, ingenuity, and psychological mastery, and the lessons of that experiment extend far beyond the plantation and its immediate participants. In the next section, we will examine how the secret, once fully revealed, reshaped intergenerational understanding, altering not only personal identity but also family dynamics, societal perceptions, and the awareness of hidden forces that govern behavior. The revelation did not end with the original children. It rippled across generations, reshaping family dynamics, perceptions of authority, and the understanding of identity itself. Descendants who had grown up with stories of the past suddenly faced the unnerving realization that much of what they believed about their lineage was constructed, manipulated, or hidden. Heirlooms, family tales, and generational pride carried new weight. They were no longer just symbols of heritage, but markers of deception, courage, and survival. The legacy of the mother's audacious act became a living testament to the power of one individual to rewrite the trajectories of lives for decades. This intergenerational impact highlights the fragility of narratives we take for granted. Families, communities, and even societies often operate under collective assumptions about identity, loyalty, and morality. A single hidden truth, when uncovered, can destabilize these assumptions and force a confrontation with the unseen forces that shape behavior. The swapped children became not only conduits for the revelation of their own histories, but also mirrors reflecting broader truths about human systems, that perception often outweighs reality, that power can be invisible, and that courage executed in silence can leave permanent marks on the world. Emotionally, the descendants faced a complex spectrum of responses. Pride in the mother's ingenuity mixed with grief over lost years, admiration for resilience intertwined with a bitter recognition of what had been denied. Families had to learn to reinterpret relationships, recontextualize memories, and accept that morality is seldom absolute. The revelation demanded intellectual rigor and emotional fortitude. It forced descendants to grapple with the duality of human experience, the capacity for both cruelty and brilliance, oppression and defiance, compliance and strategy. The mother's audacity became a lens through which the next generations understood agency, survival, and the subtle forces that govern every human interaction. Philosophically, this intergenerational awakening reinforces the central lesson: knowledge is power, secrecy is influence, and actions taken in the shadows can reverberate far beyond what the eye can see. The mother's choice demonstrates that even within systems designed to suppress and control, opportunity for mastery exists. The long-term effects on family, identity, and perception are reminders that understanding hidden structures, whether psychological, social, or institutional, is essential to navigating life consciously rather than passively. In the next section, we will explore the lessons this story provides for understanding hidden agendas, psychological control, and the invisible mechanisms that shape our choices, showing how the past continues to inform present power dynamics. The story of the mother and her swapped children is more than historical drama. It is a masterclass in hidden agendas, psychological influence, and the mechanisms of control that operate beneath the surface of everyday life. The mother understood the system she lived within, its hierarchies, its expectations, its blind spots. She recognized that power is rarely absolute, It relies on perception, compliance, and the willingness of individuals to accept narratives without question. By exploiting these truths, she reshaped destinies without ever exposing herself to immediate risk. Her actions demonstrate a principle that applies as much to modern life as it did to the plantation. Systems can be manipulated when one understands their rules, their assumptions, and the invisible levers that govern behavior. Psychological control operates quietly, often invisibly. On the plantation, faith, loyalty, and routine structured behavior, conditioning individuals to act in ways that reinforced authority. The mother's brilliance was in subverting these same mechanisms. By understanding how the master and household interpreted behavior, she could act within the system while simultaneously bending it to her will. This is the essence of psychological mastery, the ability to operate undetected, to influence outcomes by shaping perception, and to leverage existing structures rather than attempting to overpower them directly. Her audacity exposes a deeper truth about human systems. Authority can be redirected, influence can be exercised invisibly, and mastery often comes from subtlety rather than force. The lessons extend to anyone who seeks to navigate complex hierarchies, corporate, social, or institutional. Understanding the rules, predicting behavior, and exploiting hidden assumptions are the hallmarks of strategic insight. The mother's act also illustrates the moral complexity inherent in wielding such knowledge. Action in secrecy can protect and empower, yet it can also impose consequences on those who are unaware. True mastery is not reckless. It is deliberate, patient, and guided by an understanding of both the system and the human psychology that sustains it. Finally, the story teaches that the most powerful influence often occurs over time. The mother's decision did not produce immediate, visible effects. Its impact unfolded over decades, gradually reshaping identities, relationships, and perceptions. This is a reminder that influence and control do not always manifest as instant victories. They can be slow, cumulative, and invisible, affecting lives in ways that only become apparent when the hidden structures are revealed. Knowledge, patience, and psychological acuity combine to create consequences far greater than brute action alone could achieve. In the next section, we will explore the emotional and cognitive transformation of those involved, showing how the revelation reshaped not only perception of the past, but the capacity for insight, self-mastery, and understanding hidden systems. The emergence of hidden truths initiates a profound cognitive and emotional transformation. Those who lived under the shadow of the swamp could no longer take their perceptions at face value. The child raised in privilege faced the unsettling realization that identity is not merely a product of upbringing, but also of hidden forces and unseen decisions. Memories became suspect, relationships were re-examined, and trust in the apparent stability of the world wavered. Similarly, the child raised in oppression underwent a parallel awakening, understanding that the life they had lived, though shaped by hardship, had been influenced by strategic intervention, and that unseen guidance had protected and shaped them in ways previously unacknowledged. Both experienced a heightened awareness of reality's fragility and the subtle interplay of influence and perception. Psychologically, this awakening can be disorienting. Cognitive dissonance becomes unavoidable when decades of assumed truth are revealed to be fabricated. Emotions, shock, grief, pride, awe, and even anger, intertwine, forcing a reassessment of personal narratives and social hierarchies. The mother's act serves as a case study in how individuals can exert profound influence over others without detection, and it highlights the resilience required to navigate long-term uncertainty. The children's minds became attuned to subtleties they had once ignored, noticing patterns, reading between lines, and understanding that the apparent reality was only a fraction of the truth. This transformation is not purely destructive. It cultivates insight. By confronting the hidden forces that shape their lives, both children, and by extension, the wider household, developed a nuanced understanding of power, control, and human behavior. They learned that authority is conditional, loyalty is often performative, and identity can be redirected without overt confrontation. The revelation forced them to recognize that life is as much about perception as reality, and that mastery over circumstances requires not just action, but awareness of the invisible forces at work. Emotionally, the transformation fosters resilience. Understanding hidden structures and their influence creates the capacity to navigate life strategically, anticipating deception and exercising patience. The mother's audacity becomes a blueprint for navigating systems of control, identifying leverage points, observing patterns, and acting decisively when opportunity arises. Awareness of these hidden forces is both a shield and a weapon, empowering those who seek to operate consciously in a world shaped by unseen agendas. In the next section, we will examine the final unraveling of long-held illusions, the convergence of suppressed truths, and the transformative impact this revelation had on identity, morality, and the perception of power itself. The long-held illusions finally began to unravel completely, like threads pulled from a tapestry carefully woven over decades. The children, the household, and even extended relatives confronted a convergence of truths that had been suppressed, ignored, or unknown. Each revelation acted as a shockwave, destabilizing assumptions, challenging loyalties, and forcing recognition of the unseen mechanisms that had shaped their lives. The privileged child, once confident in their place and identity, now faced the unsettling knowledge that every marker of status, every reassurance of belonging, had been orchestrated. The other child, raised under hardship, saw that survival and cunning had been both necessity and instrument, shaped by a mother who understood human nature more deeply than any observer suspected. Emotionally, the impact was staggering. Shock and disbelief were quickly followed by awe, grief, and a profound sense of admiration for the mother's courage. Relationships shifted as every participant recalibrated their understanding of one another. Trust, once implicit, required reassessment. Assumptions about authority and loyalty were dismantled. The household became a crucible, where decades of hidden strategy collided with the raw human responses of revelation. Anger, pride, shame, and wonder intermingled, creating a psychological environment more intense than any overt conflict could achieve. The unraveling also illuminated the subtle power dynamics that had governed their world. Authority, once unquestioned, proved fragile. Identity, once assumed, proved conditional. Perception, once taken for granted, became a tool and a weapon. The mother's actions were revealed not as mere defiance, but as a masterclass in understanding influence, human behavior, and the malleability of reality. She had demonstrated that a single individual, operating in secrecy and with audacious purpose, could alter the lives of many, reshape perceptions, and disrupt assumed hierarchies with nothing more than insight, patience, and calculated risk. Philosophically, the final unraveling challenges every conventional notion of morality, justice, and destiny. Deception, love, survival, and courage intersected in a complex moral calculus that defies simple judgment. The revelation forces observers to recognize the fragility of systems, the power of subtle influence, and the enduring significance of knowledge wielded wisely. It demonstrates that the hidden forces shaping human behavior are often stronger than visible authority, and that mastery lies in understanding, anticipating, and acting within those unseen currents. In the next section, we will explore the enduring lessons of the Mother's Act, showing how the convergence of suppressed truths continues to illuminate power, identity, and the psychology of control for generations to come. The enduring lessons of the Mother's audacious act are profound, resonating far beyond the immediate consequences of the swap. Her actions reveal that true power rarely manifests through brute force. It operates in shadows, in patience, in strategy, and in the mastery of perception. By understanding human behavior, social hierarchies, and the psychology of control, she was able to bend circumstances to her will without detection. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully timed act became part of a deliberate orchestration that reshaped lives for decades. This teaches an essential truth. Influence is most potent when invisible, and mastery is achieved not by confrontation, but by subtle manipulation of assumptions and perception. Identity, the story demonstrates, is never absolute. It can be borrowed, imposed, stolen, or redirected. The privileged child, raised under false assumptions, and the child raised in oppression, denied what was naturally theirs. Both experienced a psychological awakening that reshaped their understanding of self and others. The story challenges the illusion that identity is fixed. It shows that perception can govern reality, and that awareness of unseen forces allows one to navigate life with foresight and strategic insight. Those who recognize hidden dynamics gain the ability to influence outcomes in ways unavailable to the unaware. At the societal level, the narrative exposes the fragility of hierarchies, norms, and systems of authority. Institutions and communities function on assumptions, trust, and perceived legitimacy. When hidden truths surface, they disrupt these foundations, forcing a reckoning that is both psychological and moral. The mother's courage illustrates that one individual, armed with knowledge, patience, and strategic foresight, can challenge and reshape structures that appear permanent and unassailable. The lesson is universal: control is never absolute, and awareness of hidden levers grants power. Emotionally and philosophically, the story underscores the interplay of morality, survival, and courage. The mother's decision, though technically deceptive, was guided by love, foresight, and an understanding of justice that transcended conventional morality. It demonstrates that sometimes ethical action requires operating outside visible norms, and that the greatest mastery often comes in silence, through choices unseen but consequences far-reaching. Those who internalize this lesson gain not only insight into human behavior, but also the ability to act decisively and strategically in the shadowed spaces where true influence resides. In the next section, we will explore how the revelation reshaped perception of authority, loyalty, and trust, forcing every participant to confront the psychological dynamics that govern power and obedience in human systems. The revelation of the swap forced a seismic shift in the perception of authority, loyalty, and trust. The master's family, once confident in their control, now confronted the fragility of the systems they had relied upon. Authority, it became clear, was conditional, dependent on perception, assumption, and compliance rather than inherent right. Trust, long granted without question, was destabilized. Those who had once acted obediently found themselves questioning the very structures that had dictated behavior for decades. The invisible threads of influence, manipulation, and unseen strategy were suddenly visible, revealing the true complexity of human systems. For the privileged child, this shift was disorienting. Every action previously regarded as natural, every word of guidance, every affirmation of status now carried the weight of revelation. Loyalty was no longer an unquestioned virtue. It became contingent upon understanding the motives, constraints, and unseen actions of others. Meanwhile, the child raised under oppression confronted the duality of power, the capacity to survive invisibly and the sudden recognition of inherited agency that had been masked by circumstance. Both learned that trust is earned not by hierarchy alone, but by insight, vigilance, and the capacity to perceive hidden forces at work. The psychological implications of this realization were profound. Authority is often assumed absolute until it is challenged by knowledge, cunning, or audacity. Loyalty can be manipulated, misdirected, or weaponized, and trust is as fragile as perception itself. The Mother's Act revealed the invisible architecture of control, how decisions are influenced, behaviors guided, and beliefs shaped without overt coercion. Her strategy demonstrated that mastery over a system is not dependent on opposition, but on understanding it from within, predicting reactions, and manipulating expectations with precision. Emotionally, this reshaping created both turbulence and clarity. The revelation forced everyone involved to navigate moral ambiguity, emotional upheaval, and the destabilization of long-held assumptions. Yet it also provided insight, the ability to perceive hidden dynamics transforms vulnerability into agency. Recognizing the unseen currents that govern human behavior is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a survival skill, a form of power, and a path to mastery. Those who internalize this lesson can operate strategically in any system, aware of the levers of influence that others fail to see. In the next section, we will examine the deep ethical and emotional questions that arise from long-term deception, exploring how the Mother's Act challenges conventional morality while redefining courage, love, and strategic mastery. The Mother's Act forces an unavoidable confrontation with ethical ambiguity. On the surface, her deception appears morally questionable. She swapped her child with the masters, altering lives without consent, manipulating identities, and bending the truth for decades. Yet beneath the surface lies a deeper calculus, one governed by love, survival, and an intimate understanding of power. Conventional morality cannot easily categorize her actions. They exist in a shadowed space where courage, foresight, and defiance intersect. Her choice demonstrates that ethical action is not always aligned with societal norms, and that true bravery often requires decisions invisible to the world, executed in the shadows, yet with consequences that ripple outward. Emotionally, the act is a study in the complexity of human experience. For the children, the revelation creates a spectrum of conflicting feelings, admiration for the audacity and strategic genius of their mother, grief for the lives altered and opportunities lost, anger at the deception, and/or at the subtle mastery that orchestrated decades of hidden influence. For the household, the moral dissonance is equally profound. They must reconcile admiration for ingenuity with shock and disorientation, coming to terms with the fact that authority, identity, and loyalty were carefully manipulated for a higher purpose. The story also illustrates a broader philosophical truth. Morality is contextual. Actions that seem unethical in one frame may be heroic in another, particularly when the system itself is unjust. The mother acted not only to protect her child, but to navigate, subvert, and survive a world designed to constrain her. The ethical ambiguity of her decision is inseparable from its effectiveness, revealing that courage and moral insight often operate in tandem, especially in environments governed by coercion, oppression, or inequality. Strategically, the act is a blueprint for understanding influence and psychological mastery. By carefully anticipating reactions, controlling perception, and operating in the shadows, she ensured success without confrontation. Her example demonstrates the intersection of ethics, psychology, and strategy, the ability to act decisively, responsibly, and effectively in morally complex situations. Emotional intelligence, foresight, and moral courage converge, producing outcomes that defy conventional understanding yet reveal the extraordinary potential of human agency. In the next section, we will explore the transformational impact on the children themselves, their evolving sense of identity, personal mastery, and capacity to navigate a world shaped by hidden forces. The children's transformation was as profound as it was inevitable. Identity, long assumed and unquestioned, became a living puzzle, pieces reshaped, edges blurred, and patterns rewritten by hidden truths. The child raised in privilege confronted the dizzying realization that status, comfort, and opportunity had been borrowed, not earned, that their perceived authority had been carefully constructed around a lie. Pride gave way to humility, certainty to curiosity, and obedience to a heightened awareness of the unseen forces that shape human behavior. Every decision, every relationship, every act of self-definition was suddenly filtered through the lens of hidden knowledge. For the child raised in oppression, the revelation carried a dual weight, the undeniable sting of a life denied, and the exhilarating recognition of latent agency and power. Years of hardship had forged resilience, cunning, and adaptability, yet the understanding that these qualities had been subtly guided by their mother's foresight amplified their sense of mastery. The recognition of unseen influence transformed suffering into strategy, hardship into insight, and invisibility into a form of control previously unacknowledged. Both children, in different ways, began to see life not as a set of constraints, but as a dynamic system of influence and opportunity, one that could be navigated with awareness, intelligence, and deliberate action. Psychologically, this awakening rewired perception. The children became hyper-aware of patterns, subtle cues, and hidden dynamics. Trust was no longer given blindly. Perception became calibrated to detect unseen forces. Relationships were re-evaluated in light of strategic understanding. Loyalty, authority, and influence were recognized as manipulable, yet predictable when approached with insight. The lessons learned from decades of concealed strategy became a personal toolkit for navigating complex social systems. They were no longer passive participants but active analysts, capable of interpreting, anticipating, and shaping outcomes in ways their peers could not. Emotionally, the transformation was both empowering and unsettling. The children had inherited not only the legacy of deception, but also the blueprint for strategic mastery. Awareness brought clarity, yet it also demanded responsibility. To act consciously in a world where unseen currents are constant, and to wield knowledge without succumbing to arrogance. They became heirs to a silent power, equipped with an understanding of influence, perception, and human psychology that few would ever acquire. In the next section, we will examine how this awakening extended beyond the family, revealing the subtle ways hidden forces shape communities, institutions, and societal norms, echoing the lessons of the swap on a grander scale. The lessons of the swap extend far beyond the household. They resonate through the structures of society itself. Institutions, like families, operate on assumptions, trust, and perceived authority. Systems of power, whether governmental, corporate, or cultural, depend on obedience, loyalty, and the acceptance of narratives often taken for granted. The mother's act demonstrates that these constructs, no matter how rigid they appear, are vulnerable to subtle influence and careful manipulation. What unfolds within a family can serve as a microcosm for the wider world. Perception shapes reality. Hidden forces govern outcomes, and awareness of these forces grants unprecedented agency. The societal implications are profound. Control is maintained not just by visible enforcement, but by invisible psychological levers, expectation, perception, and routine. Much like the plantation, modern communities and institutions rely on unexamined assumptions to function. People rarely question authority until evidence of manipulation surfaces. The swap reveals that even deeply entrenched hierarchies can be subverted when one understands the hidden dynamics at play. Influence, patience, and strategy can overcome brute power, and subtle action can create long-lasting consequences across generations. Psychologically, this demonstrates the fragility of collective perception. Groups, communities, and institutions operate under shared assumptions, and these can be exploited or redirected by those who perceive what others cannot. Authority is conditional, loyalty is performative, and conformity often masks manipulation. The mother's example becomes a template. Those who understand the architecture of influence can navigate, disrupt, or master systems from within, reshaping outcomes over time without open conflict. It is a lesson in strategy, perception, and long-term planning that applies equally to the personal and the societal scale. Emotionally and morally, the story serves as a caution and a guide. The consequences of deception are real, profound, and often unavoidable. Yet the act also demonstrates courage, foresight, and the capacity to enact change within oppressive systems. The interplay between ethics, strategy, and human psychology becomes evident. Morality is not always about obedience to the visible law, but about understanding context, anticipating consequences, and acting in alignment with a higher purpose, protection, survival, or justice. In the next section, we will delve into how these lessons inform the understanding of manipulation, hidden agendas, and power dynamics that continue to operate invisibly in modern life, highlighting the enduring relevance of the mother's audacity. The mother's act serves as a mirror for the hidden agendas and invisible power structures that permeate modern life. Just as she manipulated perception, expectation, and trust to achieve her goal, contemporary systems, corporations, governments, media, and social institutions operate on similar principles. Power rarely announces itself overtly. It is sustained through subtle cues, narratives, and the control of perception. People comply not because they are coerced openly, but because the environment has been designed to guide their choices, limit awareness, and enforce conformity. The story of the swapped children illuminates how mastery of unseen dynamics can transform not only individual outcomes, but entire systems. Understanding these hidden forces requires psychological acuity. The mother's success lay in her ability to observe, predict, and act without detection. She exploited assumptions, leveraged invisible hierarchies, and orchestrated long-term outcomes with precision. Modern parallels exist in every structured organization. Decisions, loyalties, and behaviors are shaped by incentives, social expectation, and unseen pressures. Those who recognize the levers of influence, what she exploited instinctively, gain a profound advantage. They see beyond appearances, anticipate consequences, and navigate systems with a strategic clarity unavailable to the unaware. The story also underscores the emotional cost of uncovering hidden agendas. Awareness brings clarity, but it also demands responsibility and vigilance. To perceive the subtle currents shaping behavior is to inherit the weight of knowledge, the knowledge that few act openly, that deception is often necessary for survival, and that courage and patience are essential tools for navigating power. Both the children and modern observers must confront the uncomfortable truth. Systems are malleable, identities are conditional, and mastery lies in understanding and leveraging the invisible. Philosophically, the narrative challenges assumptions about morality, authority, and compliance. It asks difficult questions. When is deception justified? When does love or survival override convention? How can insight into hidden structures be wielded ethically? The mother's audacity provides answers through example. Strategic, courageous, and morally complex action can preserve life, protect agency, and expose the limits of power without immediate confrontation. Her lessons echo in every system that thrives on perception, obedience, and unseen influence. In the next section, we will explore how awareness of these hidden dynamics cultivates personal mastery, teaching the children and the observer how to navigate life strategically, ethically, and with heightened perception. Awareness of hidden dynamics is the gateway to personal mastery. The children, having confronted the decades-long deception, began to understand the subtle forces that govern behavior, identity, and authority. The lessons learned were not abstract, they were practical, actionable, and transformative. By observing patterns, anticipating reactions, and discerning the invisible currents that shape life, they acquired the ability to navigate systems that had once seemed impenetrable. Knowledge became power, perception became strategy, and insight into human psychology became the foundation of control over circumstance. Personal mastery, as revealed by the mother's audacity, is rooted in patience and observation. She did not act impulsively. She studied, predicted, and manipulated outcomes carefully over decades. This teaches a critical lesson. Strategic influence is not about force. It is about timing, understanding human nature, and leveraging unseen structures. Those who cultivate this skill recognize opportunities invisible to others, understand the consequences of action and inaction, and learn to operate within systems while subtly bending them to their advantage. Mastery is both internal and external. It requires control over one's own mind and the ability to shape the perceptions and behaviors of others. Emotionally, personal mastery comes with responsibility. Knowledge of hidden forces is double-edged. It empowers, yet it also exposes one to the weight of decisions whose consequences may unfold slowly, invisibly, and irrevocably. The children learned that influence requires not just understanding, but ethical discernment, patience, and courage. Acting strategically without awareness of morality risks becoming manipulative or destructive. Acting without insight ensures power is squandered. True mastery balances cognition, emotion, and ethics, knowing what can be done, what should be done, and when silence is the most potent action. The story also emphasizes the universality of these lessons. Systems, whether historical or contemporary, operate on assumptions, expectations, and unseen leverage points. By internalizing the mother's strategies, the children, and any observer willing to learn, gain the tools to identify vulnerabilities, anticipate behavior, and act decisively when opportunity arises. This is mastery not as domination, but as enlightened action, guided by awareness, strategy, and the understanding of human psychology. In the next section, we will examine the long-term consequences of such mastery, how it transforms identity, strengthens resilience, and equips individuals to navigate both personal and systemic challenges with calculated insight. The cultivation of mastery reshapes identity and fortifies resilience. The children, having absorbed the lessons of deception, hidden influence, and strategic patience, began to redefine who they were and how they engaged with the world. Identity was no longer passive, a product of circumstance or external labels, but active, deliberate, and self-aware. They understood that their lives could be directed by insight rather than by assumption, that perception could be harnessed as both shield and tool, and that awareness of hidden forces granted the ability to navigate life with foresight and precision. Resilience emerged naturally, forged in the crucible of deception, revelation, and emotional reckoning. This resilience was psychological as much as it was practical. The children learned to tolerate uncertainty, question authority, and anticipate the unseen consequences of every action. They became adept at distinguishing between appearances and reality, recognizing that power and influence often operate quietly, invisibly, and over long spans of time. By internalizing the mother's strategies, they gained a framework for navigating any system of control, to observe, analyze, and act decisively without alerting those who assume they hold the upper hand. Every setback, every perceived limitation, became an opportunity to refine strategy and strengthen awareness. Emotionally, the transformation fostered a complex balance of humility and empowerment. They recognized their vulnerability, yet understood how knowledge and strategic insight create agency. Trust was no longer blind. Relationships were approached with discernment, and decisions were filtered through the lens of both ethics and effectiveness. The lessons of patience, subtlety, and psychological acuity empowered them to engage with the world strategically, but also humanely, understanding that mastery does not require domination, but foresight, awareness, and the courage to act in alignment with principle. Long-term, This cultivation of mastery transformed potential. The children became capable of shaping circumstances in ways their peers could not through force, but through strategic insight and understanding of unseen dynamics. They inherited not only a story of survival and deception but a toolkit for life, the ability to navigate complexity, anticipate behavior, and leverage hidden forces to achieve desired outcomes. Their identities, once constrained by circumstance, now flourished through awareness, intelligence, and emotional acuity. In the next section, we will explore how this mastery interacts with morality, ethics, and influence, highlighting the delicate balance required to wield insight without becoming enslaved to manipulation. Mastery without ethics is a dangerous gift. The children, now fully aware of hidden dynamics and unseen levers of influence, confronted the responsibility that comes with such knowledge. Understanding perception, control, and human behavior conveys power, but wielding it without moral discernment risks replicating the very oppression they had survived. The Mother's Act demonstrates the delicate balance between strategic audacity and ethical restraint. Influence must be guided by purpose, grounded in principle, and executed with foresight. Knowledge alone is insufficient. It is the alignment of insight with conscience that creates true mastery. Psychologically, this balance is challenging. Awareness of hidden agendas can breed cynicism, distrust, and manipulation. Without grounding in ethics, the children could have become instruments of covert domination, seeing every interaction as an opportunity to exert control. Instead, they internalized the lesson that strategy is most powerful when applied responsibly. Influence, like a hidden river, flows silently and shapes outcomes without the need for overt coercion, but its direction must be guided by understanding, restraint, and the recognition of human cost. Mastery, therefore, is not domination. It is the ability to anticipate, navigate, and act with purpose while preserving moral integrity. Emotionally, the integration of ethics into strategic awareness fosters clarity and resilience. The children learn to recognize not only the mechanics of hidden systems, but also the emotional and human consequences of manipulating them. They understood the weight of deception, the burden of unseen influence, and the responsibility inherent in exercising foresight. This comprehension transformed their approach to relationships, authority, and decision-making. They could act decisively without cruelty, intervene without exploitation, and influence without eroding trust. Their power was subtle, enduring, and rooted in consciousness rather than compulsion. Philosophically, this synthesis of insight and morality demonstrates the highest form of human agency. The story of the swapped children becomes a blueprint for navigating complexity. Recognize the hidden forces that shape behavior, cultivate strategic awareness, and act with deliberate, ethically informed intent. This is the true legacy of the mother's audacity, not merely the preservation of life, but the awakening of insight, moral courage, and mastery that transcends circumstance. In the next section, we will examine the broader implications of this mastery for understanding societal systems, human behavior, and the unseen patterns that govern lives at every scale.